Brilliant. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the session. For those of you who haven't already seen me this morning, I am Daisy Chapman-Chamberlain, Specification Manager at Rail North Partnership, looking after and developing rail in the north of England. And I have a fantastic panel today to discuss all things open access. And does open access have a future as we move towards a nationalised system with Great British Railways, despite the record number of open applications for open access with the ORR. So we'll introduce our panel and then we'll move into some pre-prepared questions. After the pre-prepared questions, I will be inviting the audience to ask questions. You'll wait for the microphone to come to you and then you'll be able to ask whatever it is you'd like. So please be thinking of questions as we go through the start of the panel. So, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Daisy. My name is Lorna, Derrick. I am the Strategic Growth Director for TXM Consult. I've only been with TXM for 4 months now, and many of you would probably have known me from being with Hitachi Rail for 7 years. Thank you, Daisy.
Hi, everyone. I am not Martin. I'm here replacing him. So if you're wanting to hear about Lumos operation, you are in bad luck. My name is Milda Manomaityte. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the Railway Industry Association, which is a trade body for UK railway suppliers, so people who actually build and maintain the railways.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Yeowart. I'm the Managing Director of Grand Union Trains, an open access development company.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me, everyone. And we're going to start with a very open access question. Do we need open access with a nationalised future? Why can the government not simply provide the necessary services? So I'll open it to anyone who wants to come in.
Well, that's probably a good place for me to start. Pre-privatisation, they didn't provide the services, and that's one of the reasons why open access has been successful. They have reintroduced services to places long forgotten by the previous public administration, and there's no reason to believe that anything will be any different under a completely public railway. And I think everybody knows in railway terms, when finances get tight with the government, the railway is so far down the important list that that's when places start to disappear from the network. So without open access, without privatisation, Sunderland, Middlesbrough, Hartlepool, Bradford, Halifax, Huddersfield, Hull, Selby, no trains, and no likelihood of ever getting any trains. And I think that would be exactly the same if open access disappeared over the next few years.
I'll jump in and follow up on what Ian said, and the reason being, you mentioned Hull. You might recognise my dulcet northern tones. I grew up just outside Hull. Hull Train celebrates 25 years of being in service as an open access operator this year, as you'll know, Martin. For me, my first experience of being connected to anywhere further than the north, going down to London, was a consequence of Hull Trains being successful in operation, running a service. And what I would say, and the areas that you've identified there, is that for me, it's very much this north and south divide. So if we're talking about true levelling up, and we're using transport as one of those mechanisms to do it, in the absence of any franchised operation train routes, it's actually the open access operators that are connecting some of these more socially deprived communities with some of the cities.
Yeah. Well, as a trade body for suppliers, we don't really have a view on whether that's needed or not. But what we would like to do is avoid the either-or situation. There will be a mixed ecosystem. The government has made a decision that there will be a GBR that will operate the trains. There has been a decision that the freight will be a private sector, and also to honor existing open access contracts. So we are already in mixed ecosystem. So what we really need to focus is how we will make those parts work. That will deliver innovation and you know, even today I've been speaking with some of our members saying, you know, what's your view? I'll be representing your views on a panel, and the main answer was, well, as long as it doesn't create extra layer of bureaucracy, extra layer of delays, we just want to work and deliver the work. So the kind of the romanticism maybe of either open access or GBR, we just need to avoid that and focus, okay, how we can actually work together and make this happen.
Yeah, which leads really nicely actually into my second question, which is what are the challenges and opportunities of open access as we look to the GBR future? And I think crucially, not just in terms of policy and strategy, though I'd love to discuss that too, but also in terms of the infrastructure challenges that we're currently facing. So challenges and opportunities in all of the different formats that they take as we look to the future. What does the panel think?
Well, the capacity challenge is there, whether it's open access freight, open access passenger, or whether it's GBR as whatever. The interesting thing, and the ORR did a lot of work on this historically, is that one of the things the ORR has said is that the open access operators are very good at identifying capacity. Because too often the industry, certainly in the early days, was very good at closing up capacity to prevent what they... railway people understand what I mean, white space. So there was a thought early days that the only way you could run a train was if you could find white space in the timetable, i.e. a gap in the timetable. But that was never true, because you don't get firm rights for specific slots, you get rights for quantum. And as a result, timetables get flexed to open up capacity for other people to be able to operate the trains. And when Grand Central first came to the network, and when Hull first came to the network, there were 4 intercity trains up and down the East Coast Main Line long distance. There are 8 now, and there hasn't been a massive investment in the infrastructure on the East Coast Main Line. And a lot of that is down to utilising the capacity better. And I know people will say, well, that's had an impact on performance, but utilising the capacity better and identifying the capacity. And interestingly enough, as you were mentioning earlier, there is very few tensions between operators once they're on the network. The tension is getting to the network. Once an operator's on the network, everybody works together. And we're finding that on the the southeast, where we're looking to run trains out of Marchwood, Network Rail, Southwest, which is now GBR. We're all working together to produce a timetable that works for everybody. Now, whether we get approval is another matter, but the timetable is not an issue. And so Open Access has done a great job in identifying capacity, and now we just need to build on that and work it forward.
I would like to build on that as well. The challenge will be access for operations, and that the decision process, and what we need is a fair structure of that decision process. How do you, and a transparent process, you know, how will GBR make a decision that conflicts potentially with its own revenue priorities as well, and also freight targets, and what happens if the decision not to give access gets challenged by an operator? How does that all work? The other aspect is obviously access to maintain the tracks and the trains. And again, how will that ecosystem work? And what we would like to ask as a trade body is to get the supply chain early into those discussions, because these are the people who can find availability in the tracks using clever technology and AI and access, but they need access to data and they need that collaboration. They can optimize access to maintain track through technology. But again, we need to involve the suppliers early into those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say that in the obvious absence of the Department for Transport placing any orders for any new trains, the economy that underpins the rail industry isn't moving. Actually, it's reliable on open access at the moment. A successful deal prior to Christmas, as Ian will maybe allude to, and the deal that we've just recently done with Grand Central. And there's obviously applications in for more routes to be supported by new rolling stock. So whilst we're talking about the ORR and the implication for that to go under the GBR will have, and maybe some of the constraints it will put under for track access, whilst we're wrangling with that, nobody's placing orders for new trains. So the impact is on the supply chain. the impact is on the employees within the manufacturing sites within the UK. It's the second and third spend that's not been spent in these predominantly northern communities. So whilst we're discussing, the challenges of open access and whether it has its place, I would say for the here and now, it's probably the only part of the industry that's underpinning the rest of it.
No, I think that's a really interesting perspective. And I think building on that, again, I'd love to get everyone's perspective on the panel. Do you feel, or is there evidence that open access is investing more in innovation? Is open access investing more in building new technologies, etc.? Or do you feel that it's more GBR's responsibility and that that's something that they'll pick up? I'd love to, get a view.
It's sorry, no, you go.
No, it's kind of we're
Innovation is a difficult one if you're talking about customers and the perception of what's happening to them on a day-to-day. Innovation is really the engineering side of the railway. I cannot think that anything I've ever done while I've been at Grand Central, Arriva, and now at Grand Union can really be called innovative. All we've done is we've looked at the market. I live in the north. I understand the issues. I'm a 50-year working railwayman, so I know what it was like under BR. I know why services were lost, and it is the one area of privatisation that nobody can question has been a success. Certainly if you live in any of these places, they've now got services. So innovation is a really difficult one. It's used a lot, people are innovative, but I think that's really across to our engineering colleagues and all the work they do, rather than what you can do on a day-to-day basis. Putting electronic reservations on a train, it's not really innovative. I mean, that's just a natural progression, is it, for the world that we live in? But doing some of the things that happen trackside and on train, now that is innovative. And so I think the word innovation does get used quite a lot, but it doesn't actually mean too much, in my mind anyway.
If we were to apply innovation in terms of our approach to how we procure trains, I would say that the open access market challenges manufacturers in the pace and the haste that they will work under and the conditions. So if you were to, and my old world, obviously responding to market sounding opportunities across multiple train operating companies, right the way through to potentially winning and signing the deal, Daisy, could take anything from 18 months to 2 years. You add on 3, maybe 4 years worth of build, that whole process could have taken 7 years. Now, I know how long ordeal took before Christmas. It took weeks. And similarly, Grand Central took a handful of months. And so if we were talking about innovation, actually, it changed the way that we as an industry responded to how we have these conversations. The doors and the shutters don't come down. It's constant dialogue, which you don't get when you're running through a franchise competition. So in terms of innovation, I would say that was a distinct difference and how we could learn from that for any of the franchise opportunities in the future.
Thank you.
The biggest challenge in innovation is the rate of adoption. We have, you talk with any single exhibitor here, they have something in the pipeline that is new, different, innovative, whether it's an incremental improvement or a groundbreaking innovation. And every year I come here and speak with our members, the biggest challenge is the process of adopting that innovation. So, we built it, we proved it works, we even tested it on a test track, and there are 2 things that stop it. Then you need to test it on a live railway, and I've known companies that didn't just stop their business because they could not get access to the live railway sort of that slot to test their innovation, and they need it for a few weeks. And so that was the one challenge. And the other one is the commercial adoption as well, and that stops. So if there is an ecosystem that allows the innovators to work with the train operating companies, whether that's open access, whether it's freight or GBR itself, to say, hey, this is the innovation, let's test it, let's work together, let's fail, it doesn't work, fine, move on, let's not dwell, and then roll it out when it does work. That's where the system then works.
Yeah.
I think just add on to that, there's a bit of a plug for Porterbrook. Of course, soon there will be a full electrified test track here, so people will be able to bring the trains here and test them out without worrying about the network. So, but again, it's the private sector that's doing that.
and of course Global Centre of Rail Excellence when that opens in Wales, touch wood. Brilliant. So I think one more question from me then before we move on to questions from the audience. We had a brief conversation about this ahead of time, but we have spoken quite a lot today in various sessions about the recruitment crisis in rail, the skills crisis in rail. It's certainly something that a lot of our operators who are transitioning to GBR are feeling, and it's certainly something I think many people in the space today in terms of contractors are possibly experiencing their own recruitment difficulties. Do you think that open access is experiencing a skills and recruitment difficulty or crisis, whatever you want to call it, or is it not? And in either direction, why is that the case?
Well, we certainly don't have any shortage of people wanting to come and work for us, whichever company that we've tried to develop. But again, within the railway, unfortunately, it's quite often feast and famine, whether it be people or whether it be trains. I mentioned earlier, if we're tight financially, then carrying additional drivers for filling up roles, for example, one of the most expensive resources, I guess, is something that doesn't happen too often. But of course, the recruitment and the retirement issue is slightly different than it was 20 years ago because there is no actual retirement date. I'm well past retirement date, and probably people say, "Good, it's about time you did." But,
can't tell, Ian. Not as well.
But people want to work longer now. You know, even guys I know left the industry at what have been the standard retirement age, 65, are doing other things because they want to keep busy. And I did use the term guys because they're nearly all blokes that I used to work with. But it's a different world now. And I think the open access operators very rarely run short. Now, I know there may be some say, yeah, well, you nick everybody else's drivers, but that's not the case. Lumo didn't do that. Lumo trained everybody from scratch. But in a free world, you can't stop somebody wanting to move from one company to another if the pay is significantly better and so are the conditions. So it's an interesting one because if you believe some people, you know, working for an open access operator, well, it's dreadful. You know, no conditions of service, it's not like that. The world is a completely different place. And we found a lot of people just want to do, in fact, nearly everybody just wants to come to work and do a good job and be recognised for that job and get paid for that job. And most of the railway is like that, but when you're not in control of your own budgets, it's very difficult to start to build up a pool of resource behind it. And I don't see that changing much, to be honest. But from your question, open access, we've never had a problem.
And I would echo that, particularly I still maintain the relationship with Hull Trains. I still travel on them regularly when I go back home. And one of the things, and I think it's a unique thing, I say this with Lumo and similarly for Grand Central, when you step onto Hull Trains, for example, it almost feels like you're stepping into a family. Like people from Hull Trains who work on Hull Trains are from Hull. So they're invested in Hull Trains as a brand, as an employer. There's usually a grandma, a mother and a daughter on the train. Everybody knows everybody and they're very supportive of each other. And when adverts do go out, and I'm the first one, if I see an advert, I will signpost and share it. They are inundated with applications because they're so well respected and pay well within the railway, particularly in Hull.
I can't really comment specifically on that issue, but what I can say, the employment and skills gap is a wider industry problem, which you've already covered and discussed. Funnily enough, every week I actually get at least one LinkedIn message saying, I'm interested to work in the railway, where can I go? And I send them straight into Routes into Rail website. And that's where, interesting to hear about training new people in and people just wanting to get a job. And it's very expensive to live these days. I mean, you gotta have a job, and railways offer that opportunity of very diverse, very interesting, you can have a whole spectrum, and it's a secure job. So it is, and maybe what Bonnie said earlier as well, just having a bit more the way we portray the opportunities within the sector. You can be your own crazy self. I mean, look at me. You don't have to conform to the norms. There is no longer that a very specific type of person that works in the railway. There's a lot of opportunities, whether within the operational side or digital skills. So as a sector, we need to collaborate more in attracting these people and actually just guiding them to those opportunities where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, brilliant. I think we'll open up then to any questions from the audience. So if you do have a question, if you could pop your hand up, wait for the microphone to come to you, tell us who you are, and then ask away. So any questions? I think...
One here, Tony.
Tony? And then there's a gentleman at the back as well next.
Where's my ice cream, Tony?
It's coming. Good afternoon, panel. It's great. I think there's probably a narrowing window of opportunity for open access to influence GBR policy anyway. So, sorry, Tony Lee from Salesforce. So I guess the question to the panel is, if you had a wish list, what sort of safeguards would you want GBR to be putting in place to respect open access and other franchised opportunities in the future?
Well, there's a couple there. First of all, it's not law yet. So there's still a chance that we might go back to where Labour said they were before the election, which is that the ORR will continue to make those decisions. And bearing in mind how many passenger open access operators there are, after 30 years of privatised railway, it's not as if they're profligate and give out open access every which way. I don't think it's going to be as easy for GBR as everybody thinks, because they are still responsible to the Competition and Markets Authority to make sure that they do not abuse their dominant position. And there'll be another election in 4 years. A lot of the open access plans that are there now will only just be coming to fruition by the time we run out at the end of this government. So who knows what the next government might be. I don't think we're ever going to see a private railway again as such, but I think open access within that railway needs a bit more protection maybe. And we are working very hard within government at the moment, a lot of us within the industry, to try and pull them back to a position where they were pre-election, to understand the system. Now, Louise Haigh spent a long time with the open access operators prior to the government, and Louise was the previous Secretary of State, if you remember. She got it. She understood. But she's a Northern MP, and nearly all the open access operators, apart from the ones that have just been approved, all significantly benefit the north of England. And the Labour government in particular, there is a huge amount of support internally within Labour for open access, not just to continue, but also to be able to develop where it can and where it meets the requirements. And maybe people don't know, or maybe people have forgotten, but Hull Trains and Grand Central, both routes, were approved under a Labour government. They were not approved under a Conservative government. And they've built from there. And they've been going a long time now. And the companies that are now taking them forward, in particular First and Arriva, they want to invest. And that investment is in the UK rail network. When somebody says to you, well, they took £560 million out of LNER, which is a report that's doing the rounds currently, if you don't know beyond that, you think, well, actually, what have they done with that money? Well, what they've done with that money is invest it directly into the UK rail network, in trains and people, station improvements, all the things that maybe should have been done by the railway. But of course, if LNER get more money, it goes to the DFT, who give it to the, who then give it back to the Treasury, and the Treasury invests it somewhere in the UK. Well, all the open access operators are doing is invest it directly into the UK rail network. So the argument, it's a term you use, abstraction, you hear it about, it's actually investment in the railway, but it's private, it's coming from the private sector instead of going through the DFT. That is the major difference between them. So, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, if they'll just have to keep their eyes on the competition position that they have. But it's early days yet, so we don't know. And there's still time for it to change, because it's changed once, it might change again.
And I would add to that fairness around reviewing the applications and the, to remain the sort of almost critical friend, but to have that independence as well and impartiality. And that applies for freight as well, because freight will be up against and find themselves, as Maggie Simpson, if she was here, would say, finds themselves in the same situation as open access, competing for track access and the charges as a consequence of that. So, have fair, transparent, impartial decision making still. So if they are to go under the under GBR, that's not taken away from them.
I think just to add my own question to that, if nobody minds, and I do apologise for my phone, by the way. I am very sorry. You'd think someone's at the door and someone really wants to be let in, but I am not in Liverpool, as you may be able to see. In terms of then investment in UK rail, do we feel, and I may be, kind of setting the panel up here to give me a very obvious answer, do we feel that open access operators invest enough back into the system that they're using? So particularly thinking about the state of the infrastructure, for example, and the fact that I think it is fair to say that in the UK we have crumbling rail infrastructure. Is the view of the panel that open access could be doing more to contribute to the maintenance and improvement of the UK's rail infrastructure, or is open access doing enough?
Well, I think open access is doing enough. I mean, if you think about the franchises, because we still have the position here, they don't invest anything. Now, they will tell you that they've invested 100 million here and 100 million there, but in the days of franchising pre-COVID, that was basically because we were reducing the premium we were going to pay by X, so it's the taxpayer that ends up paying that. The funding of the rail network is done through, or it was done through the franchises. It's a terrible term, but it's a term that was used called an artificial construct. So it was always funded directly from the government to the railway, and then a lot of the train operating companies were very unhappy because Railtrack, as it was, didn't see that they had any clout with Railtrack, the TOCs with Railtrack, because they didn't get any money from them. So it was Tom Windsor who made the change, and he called it, and it was dealt with through the courts, an artificial construct. So the numbers were just sort of, okay, well, we'll put this much through that company, and we'll put this much through that company. So don't let anybody ever convince you that the TOCs have actually paid any money towards the infrastructure, because apart from when there's a renewal, they might put a bit in, there's not a lot. But when an open access operator seeks to renew its own contract, it is expected to invest into the industry. Now, whether that be new trains or whether that be infrastructure, Grand Central contributed to the new platform at Hartlepool, for example. Hull Trains did exactly the same at Howden. So they do their part and play their part. And you do get a bit, if GBR were running the railway now, we wouldn't be having this discussion, would we? Because the money would. So why should an open access operator invest all this money in trains and everything else that goes with it at its own risk and be seen somehow as being a problem? It's something that I just cannot get my head around, and it's all to do with people using, unfortunately, numbers that actually are meaningless to sort of make out that something bad is happening with open access. You're going to ask the people at Sunderland, Hartlepool, Hull and all, whether or not they think it's a good thing. And along with all that, on the East Coast Main Line, the fares are cheaper than they are anywhere else intercity because of the competition. And there are a lot of people, hopefully none of us in this room would struggle if we only had £10 in our pocket, was the last £10. But I remember when I did, and there are still people where £10 is so important. And I was talking to a Labour MP yesterday, I won't tell you which one it was, from the northeast, and he was telling me that some of his constituents, so you get an idea roughly where it is, can now travel on the train to Edinburgh and to London from Newcastle because of Lumo, and they couldn't do it before. So these are all new people coming to the railway, and people who have traditionally been forgotten and left to one side on the railway. And so open access wise, whether it continues long term or not, over these 25 years since Hull Trains started, first one, I think they've done a great job. And I think they'll continue to do a great job as well.
Brilliant. I think we had the gentleman at the back and then down here. Don't worry, Tony.
Yes, Mark Sullivan, former Transport Users Consultative Committee in Midlands. Very good to hear Ian Yeowart's experience over the years, and he can see all the things and he's write it down, what's happened since 1990. But I would point out, when you look at, would you answer whether, when you look at a repeating timetable for East Coast, which is a regular interval timetable, it needs one route, probably one path per hour for open access, but probably not more. So aren't the open access operators going to need to compete for that one? I would just ask, really, from Hull Trains. It's wonderful to say what Hull Trains does, but it only goes to London. Hull Trains hasn't offered a service to York to connect to trains to the north, nor could it actually deliver a service to Liverpool because there's a 15-minute interval Transpennine service between Leeds and Manchester. So there are limits on open access. Just one question, though, to the speaker in the middle. There are countries where they do have open access operators operating local services, but there are concessions agreed with the local authority. That's a way forward, which we don't have in this country, but Germany and I think France and certain others.
Can I come in?
But is that one which open access ought to look at? Obviously, there are well-known stories of running out of money and having to go back to the local authority for more on those routes. But that's an option for open access, which does work on the continent, I think.
Well, I think that was 3 questions, but we'll allow it. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry to just cut across you. So I don't work for Hull Trains. I'm from Hull. But I'm invested in Hull Trains because it was the first train that I took down to London, and I do manage them as an account manager for Hitachi because they're Hitachi trains, and still moving over to my current employer. But what I would say is actually to correct your point with regards to Hull Trains being Hull Trains. Actually, it's not. So Hull Trains currently has an application to run Hull trains under a Sheffield to London route. So that, at the moment, is sat and has been sat for a considerable length of time with the ORR, one of the ones that's in this huge pile to be processed. And we've got the Transpennine train, so TPE run across to York, as does Northern. Again, another application that they were considering, but the ORR, it sits in the same pile for open access. So Hull Trains are desperately trying to grow not only their routes but their brand, but they're being blocked or their applications aren't being processed because they're sat in the same pile as all of the other 38 applications as well. So it's not that they don't want to grow, they absolutely do want to grow. And sorry to jump in there, Ian, because I know you've got, you have far greater conversations than I do, because you're actually instrumental in identifying new paths for growth for some of these communities and bringing in an increase in the economies.
I'll just to come back to you. So as a railway industry association, we don't really, as I said, have a view on who operates the railway. It's how the ecosystem works together. And you mentioned about different operating models and competing for access. What our supply chain can do is find the hidden capacity. There's a lot of the way the freight operators book slots for their services. The way there is space to find some capacity within the network. However, that requires quite clever data processing, artificial intelligence, running the big data. But you need access to that data. You need collaboration. You need then if you find that capacity, then have processes in place to release it back to the network for the operators to bid for it. So that's where I say that it's so important to bring the supply chain to all of these conversations and say, okay, we have this problem of capacity. We have a busy network. How can we do it? Is there a way to do it? And I guarantee you there is, because there's a lot of clever people working in the sector.
In relation to the open access routes on the East Coast, there is roughly 1 an hour now coming up the route, but I think we all know on a mixed railway like we have here, to try and think about a clock-face timetable is impossible. I mean, I live in York, so I know coming out of London there's a train on the hour and on the half hour. But the time they arrive at York and depart going are all different. So it's not that easy on a mixed traffic railway. In relation to capacity, just one thing for how we developed. we actually use a retired Northern train planner to find our capacity. And he does a far better job than any of the systems we've ever used to try and find capacity, because he understands it and he can identify it as he goes. So there is a time for using modern stuff, particularly if we're going to have a full recast, for example. But when you're trying to find an individual pass through a very difficult timetable, you need an individual who understands all the issues that will arise in that timetable. Because as most of you probably know, quite often you have to move away to 3, 4 or 5 trains to make some minor adjustments to find that space for that train. So the industry is very good at providing the expertise that we have. And open access, well, we're looking now, I mean, we did have an application into link Cardiff and Edinburgh, but we pulled that a few months ago because there was just too much noise around the East Coast and the West Coast, and we didn't think we would get approval. So there's no point flogging that dead horse. But we are looking at the moment to run a service out of Marchwood, and Network Rail have been very supportive, as indeed are SWR/GBR now, because this is a recast. So we found that capacity in the December 24 timetable, and that's now been carried forward for the recast. And apart from a little shuffle around the clock, it looks like all those passes are still going to be good. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this one, because we have never, in 20 odd years, ever had the support of Network Rail in putting an application in. So let's wait and see what happens with this one.
Brilliant. Thank you. We just had the gentleman here. Tony, if you could pass over. Thank you very much. Deputised.
So we've heard about how old BR was underserved to the north and was southern-centric and so on. Obviously, lots happened since then. We've had a lot of devolution and more coming down the line. We've had mayors and so on. So do you think, can you imagine a situation where GBR emerges as a body that's sort of accountable enough and regionally led enough that in that situation open access operators become a liability because of the added complexity they add? Can you imagine that in the future that might happen, or what do you think?
Well, I actually think the minute you start talking about regions, then you not only bring in complexity, you also bring tension. And having worked for Regional Railways North East, I know the tension that we used to have with Regional Railways North West when we were looking to run certain trains. Was Manchester more important than Leeds? You know, was Preston more important than York? All those sort of things will happen. I never thought the railway was complex. It's as if everybody outside seemed to think it's a really complex railway. We make an application for track capacity along with our colleagues in other businesses, and either the capacity is there or it isn't there. And this used to be no different under BR, when the ops people would always decide that, and I've said this before, you might have heard it, so I'm sorry if it said it. A lot of my ops colleagues said it would be a brilliant railway if it wasn't for trains. And we found that in Railtrack. We found it in Network Rail to a degree, but I'm not finding it with my colleagues at the minute on South West. So I'm hoping maybe there has been a bit of a shift. There'll always be a bit of tension. You know, the railway was very good under the chairman that it used to have before things were changed. Sectorisation sort of sorted it. I felt they would have been better to have sold off the sectors and let them do their own thing, but that was not to be. It could be complex, but what isn't in this world? But without, again, I know I'm banging the drum for them, but without the open access operators, there's probably not 8 paths up the East Coast Main Line. Sunderland certainly, and if you live in Sunderland, you don't want to go to Newcastle to catch a train, I can tell you that. And if you live in Bradford, you don't want to go to Leeds to catch a train, I can tell you that. And that's politics, and that's what's going to happen, I guess. So there'll always be tension between mayors, North East mayors, North West mayors, Manchester, Leeds. I think it's always going to be there.
But that's where you need that access, a clear and transparent access policy and processes in place of, okay, how do you balance between competing priorities of local transport authorities wanting to improve their access there and the national priorities, investment freight operators, that's where we would like to see a clear and transparent access policy from GBR.
Did you have a question?
Have I got permission to ask 2 things?
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Just because it's you.
Thank you. David Stubbings, news editor at Rail Magazine. So there were a lot of applications in with the OR at the moment. There was the call out last year for applications that since the election has probably been another 5 or 6 while rail reform is going on. Does the panel think that maybe there should be a pause on accepting new applications to get the current backlog cleared while GBR is also set up to get the structure of the new look rail industry in place? And secondly, do you think that open access operators need to sort of, a lot of them, the applications that are in are East Coast Main Line, West Coast Main Line, even the Great Western Main Line now. Do some, should more applications be looking at other locations? I know obviously Grand Union is, but should there be sort of more thought to other places, because rather than routes that are rapidly becoming congested or full already?
So Grand Central, you'll know anyway, Ian, I've got an application in to run from the northeast of England all the way down to Brighton. So that's sat in, that's come through, I think, within the last 2 or 3 weeks. What I would say is that, and this is my opinion, it's certainly not necessarily shared by others, is that in the absence and the continual delay to the infrastructure for HS2 and consequential order of any rolling stock, I think, and Ian might have a different view, but I think this is an opportunity maybe for not only train operating companies, for open access opportunities to seek in not only creating new routes, but in the absence of the infrastructure for HS2, they're identifying these capacity challenges and running services elsewhere. So it's almost a second bite at the cherry, because if this infrastructure had been up and running in the timescale that was planned, a lot of the services that Ian and others, open access operators, would have had benefit or access to that, or would have seen the benefits because the route would have been rerouted elsewhere. And I think in the absence of that, they're seeking this as their time to look at how they can benefit from and maximise opportunities, because that infrastructure programme is delayed.
There are a couple of things there, David, I guess. One is we're very close to a decision now on the West Coast and the East Coast. I think that's imminent. There weren't that many open access applications. Let's remember there was Virgin, there was First from Rochdale, and there was WSMR. And on the East Coast, there was Hull Trains wanting to go into Sheffield. So they were the ones that were being dealt with at the time. I think inadvertently the ORR created a rod for its own back by putting an artificial deadline on that initially, because the influx that came in afterwards were from Roscoe's and from TOCs and Freight looking to extend and develop their own services beyond there. Whether we go to somewhere else, well, open access is purely commercial. We have to make a commercial case, whereas the mayors of various northern towns and cities will be looking for public money to support their services. So if there's a case, and you can see, we've done East Coast Main Line, East Coast to London, West Yorkshire to London, Scotland to London, Wales to London. Now we want to do from the New Forest to London. So we are sort of looking around, but it is difficult to put a package together, and ultimately the decision-making process is partly driven by how quick Network Rail can identify the capacity and work with you. The arguments around abstraction, well, they're pretty straightforward. We do a piece of work, regulator measures it, and then he takes a view as to, he'll know the numbers, but can I approve it, can I not approve it? Our application that we pulled for Cardiff-Edinburgh was consulted on in September 2023. That's how long ago that consultation was. And in the end, you're right, we got wrapped up in so much that we just decided the chances of it being approved were so slim that we may as well pull it now and wait to see what happens, and then think about it if the infrastructure gets improved in the future. But we are looking at one or two others, and there's plenty in here probably know of one or two others that possibly might work, so please send me an email and we'll have a look, see what we can do. Can't promise anything, but we will have a look.
That's a brilliant invitation, I think, particularly to close the session on there. So there you go. Send in your emails, people, with your ideas. Can we have a hand for the panel, please?
Thank you.
And thank you very much.